It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Irwin, my friend.
Back to Sag Harbor, S.A.N.S.
Yes, I mean, we were getting into some interesting tidbits about development threats of a community that's longstanding and so interesting. I mean, I'm just riveted on this.
I'm riveted on this also. And, Esperanza, after Esperanza and I signed off, we were talking about this privately just afterwards. There's just so much information to get out here on this. It almost became a challenge. There's such a great story, but there's also some real background. So we're going to try to make this a story with the nuts and bolts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, as much as we can. Yeah. I mean, we need the background, it's not fluff for sure.
Exactly. So we're going to talk about the development pressures because that's really what's happening there present day. But just to backtrack it a little bit and go back to this extraordinary story of Maude Terry and her sister Amaza Meredith. And by the way, if you've ever drive in this community, there's Terry Drive and Meredith Avenue. Okay.
Yeah, their legacy.
Yes. And if you go inside the art space in Sag Harbor, the church, you will see, I guess, on the high up on the wall of that building, I guess.
Oh, you mean the recently renovated church?
The recently renovated, the April Gornick, Eric Visual space, the church, which is now an art space. But for lack of a better term, it's as if they have the Sag Harbor Hall of Fame images of people important to the Sag Harbor history, and the sisters are on there.
Right. I mean, it's such an amazing, I don't know if her name is pronounced Amaza or Amaza, but she amazes me.
We should just call her amazingly Meredith because all of them, and remember, this is mid 20th century America. These are two African-American sisters. Both of them went to Columbia.
Right. Highly educated. Which in and of itself, not unheard of, but
again, mid 20th century America, women were treated differently, and African-American women were treated even more differently. I mean, yes. we don't have to elaborate on that, and Amaza Meredith also had a partner. And again, thinking of everything.
Also a highly educated
person. And they lived together in Virginia. And she founded the Fine Arts program, by the way, at Virginia State University, and was its chairperson, and actually developed, I think, where the house where she died in was called Azurest South.
Yes, that's right. And it's like an international style building, right? Structure. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And again, she also, there are still a couple of Amaza Meredith, and if we are butchering her name, we certainly apologize. I couldn't find anywhere giving me the phonetic expression of that. But anyway, it is just such it's just so extraordinary. Again, look, their achievements would be extraordinary in present day, but the fact that they were doing it in the 1940s and 1950s. And again, to reiterate what we already spoke of, these women didn't have a background in financing things. I mean, they created a syndicate and created the financing for these people to buy these houses. This is just off the charts, innovative kind of thinking. And when we say it attracted their friends, their community, like-minded people that, they went to school with. I mean, Maude Terry taught at Brooklyn Tech High School in Fort Greene. That was where a lot of the other people came from. I think one of the patriarchs, he just passed away recently, maybe over the past year or two. I think one of the real patriarchs, and I promise we will get to the development issue because we're leading into it. And I think it's going to be a good segue, was William Pickens. And William Pickens, he again just passed away, lived in Sag Harbor Hills. He was Langston Hughes' college roommate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was he a historian? Is that
He was actually a former management consultant.
ah
And his grandfather was an early organizer of the NAACP.
that I heard? Yes, that's I
Okay.
had read
So
about.
this is sort of where he's coming from. And by the way, his college roommate, if you want to just add something else to the story, William Pickens went to the University of Vermont. That's not known to this day to have an enormous African-American student body.
Yeah, yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe William Pickens was the president of the student body. Like I am, I mean, this.
They're high level people. Yeah,
He was a leader
yeah.
from way back. But he reminisces about his summers. And by the way, his family has had a presence there since the early part of the 20th century.
Right, since like the 1920s.
Yeah, yeah. I think even maybe a little earlier in Eastville.
Uh-huh.
And again, we're talking about S.A.N.S. Eastville could be an episode all its own. I mean, that's got a whole other history. We'll probably get to that at our Hamptons at some point, but
yeah, and we can't confuse them, right? I mean, you make that distinction, because I sometimes have thought in the past, oh, it's all Eastville and Azurest, and all of it is one whole thing block, and it's not.
And on the last episode, which of course, because we get so exuberant and excited, we sometimes Esperanza and I laugh about this. Sometimes we go off of the outline, which there is no outline, ladies and gentlemen, and people over where there isn't much of an outline. But to talk about these communities just for 1 second, Eastville and S.A.N.S. Through East Hampton Trails Preservation Society, we did a walk with Georgette Greer-Key, who's the president of Eastville Historical Society. As a matter of fact, Esperanza, you were at that walk.
Yes, that was very well attended.
That was fantastic walk. And then we took a little walk into Azurest. But I had more than one person, more than one, come up to me, almost sort of sheepishly, sort of tail between their legs kind of thing, and saying to me, Irwin, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but I've lived in Sag Harbor for 10 years, for 20 years. I never knew this story. So this story, both S.A.N.S. and Eastville, still remains, I guess, could we call it somewhat off radar?
I think so. And that's, I think, what you were saying before, because I said, this wasn't something that I grew up having sort of a knowledge of, even in the last 20 years, like as an adult. So it's definitely like you drive through and you just don't even think about it. And that's even, it really, I guess, came more to my awareness when I, through my gallery, I started working with an artist who's a really fine artist, Nanette Carter, and her family had a home there, or has a home in this area. And I got to even go and visit her, it was modest beach house, it was like the perfect little retreat. And Nanette, actually, you pointed me to an article where her photograph is there as a young woman at the beach, but this is actually when I kind of became aware of this neighborhood.
Exactly. And speaking of art, Frank Wimberly.
Oh, right.
Has been in Sag Harbor Hills since the mid 1950s, in a mid-century modern, which I haven't, while I haven't seen it, I would make the educated guess, if it was from the mid 50s, it's very similar to what Nanette's house looked like, and very similar to what most of the houses looked like all this time, which is where we're starting to go, because yes, it's been discovered. And by the way, these are very small enclaves. Basically every house within these three communities is walking distance to a private Gardiner's Bayfront beach.
Yes.
Beautiful beaches, beautiful bayfront, faces east, looks onto Northwest Harbor section of East Hampton. I mean, just beautiful, sandy, gorgeous beaches. And that's why they weren't the lots themselves were only quarter acre, third of an acre. They're small, not many pools, no need for them. You know,
Right. No, you got a big pool
2 blocks down, but
2 blocks down. Yeah.
but getting back to William Pickens, you know, when he talking about the reminiscing, remembering these boyhood summers, cutting through the neighbors' yards, you know, going swimming at the bay, the moms or dads offering cookies while they were walking over there. And he was talking about, and this is a quote Esperanza loved.
This is priceless quote.
She loved this quote. So
I'm stealing it.
She's stealing it as her own. I'm even going to let her tell us, because that's just the kind of guy I am.
I'm stealing it, but I say stealing. I always credit.
Yeah, we are crediting. This is
so Mr. Pickens.
This is William Mr. Pickens. And I love this line also, Esperanza. So tell us, what did Mr. Pickens say?
Well, you know, we were starting to touch on the development thread and how, you know, people were, I think we haven't really delved into this, but people moving and buying these lots and then basically tearing down the houses and building new, bigger things. And he says, like other residents, he says, people of any background are welcome here, but he hopes everyone treats the place, and this is the quote, like a community and not a commodity.
Oh, God.
This is how I feel about the Hamptons in general.
You know, honestly, if that could literally be the Our Hamptons,
like a tagline.
Yeah, a tagline for Our Hamptons.
Community, not commodity.
That is just, that blew me away as well. And it was just, what a powerful statement.
Yes.
And to elaborate on what Mr. Pickens was saying, and again, this, I can't stress this enough. I never had the privilege of meeting him, but from everything I've heard, Esperanza and I know Georgette a little bit, and, you know, she's sort of mentioned this to us. He was really one of the true patriarchs of this community.
Yes.
You know, and very generational. His son is still there. His grandchildren are all still there. But to give you more of where he's coming from, we're not interested in mega mansions. We're interested in family life, enduring friendships and connections. And these are telling, and this sort of touched on what we spoke about on the last episode of these small African-American beach enclaves. There are over 5,000 miles of beachfront in America, and we have this little slice. You know, and he sort of tied this all together with I guess we could almost say the 800-pound gorilla in this room, Esperanza. The fact that this was an African-American enclave. And Mr. Pickens said, this is another one. I mean, it almost goes hand in hand with community, not commodity. No problem with integration. The problem is with elimination. And not just I think he's referring not just the physical, but the spiritual.
Yeah, of course. It's an elimination of a history, a sense of place, our favorite phrase, sense of community, all of that. It's a spirit of a place.
So talking about the development pressures, because again, there's no such thing as places not being discovered out here at this point. Everything's been discovered. Every stone's been unturned or uprighted. But over the past few years, and again, remember what we've been saying, these houses were predominantly, 1,300 square feet. One developer purchased 4 lots in Azurest. Houses of 5,300 and 5,900 square feet occurred. We mentioned here, this is a quote from an article, an attorney with his partners bought 11 properties over the past 3 or 4 years. And, this particular person writes he loves the areas, the nature of the area, and he intends to move in with his family someday. And his quote is saying, I've been welcomed in this community by the vast majority of people who regularly come up to me and Listen to this one, Esperanza. And encourage all of this positive change.
Yes, yes. I love hearing those comments all the time. It's a good spin.
I sort of how I took it as well, and again, there have been tensions when these plans come up for review. And now, this as well as anybody, Esperanza, as we've already talked about, serves on the architectural review board of the town. What's happening
Of
with
East
a lot
Hampton,
of these,
yeah.
what of the town of East Hampton, what's happening with a lot of these plans is legally, they can't really be stopped if the developer is doing this legally. If they're buying two lots and they're combining those lots, the people on these boards that are regulating them, their hands are sort of tied. And
Well, it depends if they can combine them. But I'm wondering, Irwin, because we were talking before about this area is listed on the state and national registers, but it's not a locally designated historic district, the S.A.N.S area, right? So my understanding then is that these properties would not come before the Architectural Review Board of the Village of Sag Harbor, or of whatever they're called, the Historic Preservation and Architectural Review. So have they come up? No.
To the best of my knowledge, to your point, I don't believe they have any input, because this is not, while this is within the village of Sag Harbor, it's not a historic district. And Sag Harbor, we should add, has an awful lot of historic districts, I'm under the impression. Am I correct? I mean, there are historic districts within the village proper.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the boundaries are or how they've been designated, but I'm kind of curious about that. I'll have to do a little more research. I'm curious about how, like, this particular situation with the 11 properties would have come before the review board. But I think more the point is the fact, and we were touching on this before, is that it has, yes, been listed to the state and national registers, which doesn't really regulate very much. Really, it only serves people if there's like public works proposed, something that has public funds going toward it, that kind of thing. But the local designation would protect it greatly. And I mean, think about this. This is first of all, a African-American woman architect who created this with her sister. And it's my understanding she designed several of the homes.
A couple of the houses, that's correct.
I mean, how that cannot be designated is astounding to me. That should have happened 15, 20 years ago, if not earlier, first of all.
And that was Renee Simons, who's the president of S.A.N.S.
That's her point.
That's been her whole point.
Yeah.
That it's just, she actually writes, Esperanza, I'm reading this now, a document exists stating that areas with cultural significance developed in the Jim Crow era should be revisited.
Right. But the problem is, Irwin, that a lot of these historical commissions or DRBs or, the municipalities haven't done continued to do their homework. That's what I'm seeing with something like this, is that, okay, we establish a historic district in the 90s because we really need to do this before all of our historical resources are deleted out of his existence. And then, so technically, they're supposed to update these guidelines, these historic districts, at least every 5 years. I mean, I think that's what Mrs. Simons mentions, is that this should have been revisited.
Right.
But we haven't. I mean, and I speak for, throughout Southampton and East Hampton, that has not happened. And so, we're relying on the work done in the 80s and 90s. And then that's it. We've just kind of rested on that and not done anything else to continue I don't want to call it the fight, although it certainly feels like that now, for preservation. It's really, it's shameful.
It is. And I remember actually discussing these exact issues with you, talking about the lack of a historic district in Wainscott.
That's right.
And also East Hampton Village, where you have I think the document goes back to, the Robert Hefner document goes back to 1990 or something.
Yeah, that's like I said, most of this, East Hampton Village may have started a bit earlier when they started realizing, like from the 40s on, that things were changing, but 70s, 80s, 90s, crucial moments. And then up until the early 2000s, there was some activity. And then all of a sudden, last 20 years, nothing. But, despite people asking for it too.
And again, this one, the S.A.N.S in particular, honestly, it's almost magnified just because of the fact that we're talking about an African-American enclave of which you can count on less than one hand places like this existing. Again, Oak Bluffs,
yes,
Highland Beach, and I'm sitting here frustrated. Yes. Could you imagine Renee Simons? Could you imagine the Pickens heirs?
Right. The people living there. Yeah. Yeah.
The people living there. And it's just between the general overall lack of awareness of this extraordinary story. There's no other word for it. And we tend to use that word a lot on our Hamptons, but it is true. I mean, all of these story, the abstract expressionists we spoke of, it's an extraordinary story. The fishing and farming families are an extraordinary story. This is also an extraordinary story. And this is almost sounding like a commercial now, but that's the whole point of our Hamptons. There are all of these stories begging to be told.
Yes.
And
to give people the context of what is here so that it's not relegated, which it seems that that's the case, people encourage all of the positive change.
Right.
History, yes, is about change. I just had a conversation earlier about this. This is sort of could be the academic version of history, is that it's all about change. I would argue there's a big part of the history that is continuity.
I would 1,000% agree. And to that point, and we touched on we can go back to an earlier Our Hamptons episode when we were talking about Paul Goldberger, how he said, we're not frozen in time. We're not a museum.
Right.
S.A.N.S isn't a museum.
Right.
East Hampton Village is not a museum. We understand that. But this sense of place is, for me, just magnified by how rare it is. You want to talk rarefied air?
Yes.
Rarefied air. Highland Beach, Oak Bluffs, S.A.N.S. I mean, honestly, that's it. And I can't explain why Sag Harbor Village is, what
they're waiting for.
What they're waiting for.
Right.
This is precious beyond belief. And
the one thing that they have, which is something that I guess we could say requires more work to be done, for instance, in Wainscott, where I live. But here you have a community that actually wants this to protect the place where they live. And yet it's not happening despite the demand.
And I think at this point, we're going to leave it there. This is probably a subject. Somehow I have a feeling we're going to end up returning to this place again, Esperanza.
I think we'll be revisiting a lot of our topics, subjects, places, because, we could just go on and on. There's so much really substance to all of this.
Yeah. And again, this story, S.A.N.S, again, we've used this on prior podcasts. Transport yourself to this time. Two African-American women, late 1940s, early 1950s, creating a syndicate, financing.
Yeah, they did the unthinkable. They did.
It's unthinkable.
Right.
What these two sisters don't get there. They should be household names.
I agree. I
You know,
agree.
they should be
And
household names.
hopefully that will happen,
They-
and not in the too distant future.
They deserve it. Esperanza, what a great dialogue. Thank you for
Yes,
it.
as always, Irwin. Thanks so much. We'll keep
Okay, till next
exploring.
time.
Look forward to it.
Me too. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.